Describe the interval or intervals on which the function is continuous. We have x plus 1 over the square root of x. So we have two types of functions here. First, we have a rational. And for rational functions, we can't have the denominator be 0. So that means the square root of x cannot be 0. We also have another restriction on the square root of x. This is an even root. So that means the expression under the square root or the even root has to be greater than or equal to 0. So that means that x has to be greater than or equal to 0. So we have two conditions that we need to satisfy. So first, let's look at the first restriction, that the square root of x cannot be 0. So we need to find whenever the square root of x is 0 and then exclude that value. So we have the square root of x equals 0, and to get x by itself, we square both sides. And we get that x is 0. So when x is 0, the bottom is 0, so that means we need to exclude this value. So that means the function is not continuous at x equals 0. So now we need to look at the restriction on the expression under the square root. The expression under the square root has to be greater than or equal to 0. So because this is just x greater than or equal to 0, we don't need to solve anything. The values such that x is greater than or equal to 0 need to be included in our domain or wherever the function is continuous. So now let's use both of these conditions to determine where the function is continuous. It's a good idea to draw a number line and then either indicate the values that you are excluding or the values that you are including. So first we need to exclude x equals 0. So I'm going to put an x at x equals 0 on this number line. Now I need to look at the values such that x is greater than or equal to 0. But remember that we cannot have x be 0. So we can't use x is greater than or equal to 0. So we're going to use x is greater than 0. So we can include the values such that x is greater than 0. And that will include all these values to the right of 0. So now let's write the interval. We will be including the values from 0 to infinity. However, 0 is not included, so we will use a parentheses. And infinity and negative infinity always get parentheses. And this is the interval on which the function is continuous.